There are teachings that were never hidden. They were encoded. And when you truly understand what Thoth and Jesus were trying to communicate, something extraordinary happens. Your timeline can no longer remain the same. Not because you believe in something new, but because certain truths, once integrated, reorganize the mind so deeply that your energetic field cannot sustain your former identity. It is as if a forgotten frequency awakens inside you. Before we move forward, subscribe to the channel. This is not a formality. The more this community grows, the stronger the collective field becomes. Like, comment, participate. Consciousness expands more powerfully when many awaken together. Today, we enter a territory where ancient spirituality and modern science stop contradicting each other and start revealing themselves as two languages describing the same phenomenon, the human capacity to alter states of reality through consciousness. I say this with responsibility and clarity. What is historically or scientifically verifiable will be presented as such. What belongs to symbolic or modern interpretation will also be made clear. My role is to guide you with honesty, depth, and precision. For millennia, humanity treated the teachings of Jesus and Thoth as poetic metaphors, moral stories, or distant myths. But what if they were actually mental manuals, operational instructions, sophisticated descriptions of how to access expanded states of consciousness and interact with multiple layers of reality? Quantum physics shows us that reality is not fixed, but probabilistic. That observation changes outcomes. That multiple timelines coexist as possibilities. When these scientific principles meet the ancient spiritual codes, something remarkable emerges. A map for transitioning between different versions of yourself. In the next moments, we will explore concepts rarely discussed. Not just what Thoth and Jesus taught, but why these messages directly impact your timeline. And a little later, you will begin to see that these two masters, separated by cultures and centuries, were describing the same internal mechanism, the same portal, just in different languages. Take a deep breath. Allow yourself to enter this field of inquiry. Nothing here requires blind belief, only curiosity, presence, and willingness to observe what has always been in front of you, but never explained this way. When you're ready, we continue. When we observe the teachings of Jesus and Thoth without traditional religious lenses, and without the superficial mysticism that often distorts their messages, something surprising becomes clear. Both were describing internal states that can reorganize the structure of perceived reality. This doesn't mean, scientifically speaking, that the physical universe bends like paper in response to our will. But it does mean, with increasing clarity, that the way we perceive, interpret, and respond to the world profoundly alters the set of possibilities available to us. Neuroscience calls this perceptual plasticity. Quantum physics calls it the collapse of probabilities. Ancient spiritual texts called it transmutation, revelation, or rebirth. Thoth, in the Emerald Tablets, whose physical origins are historically partial but whose symbolic content has been studied for centuries, describes internal processes that resemble states of consciousness rather than external rituals. When he speaks of rising above the shadow of forms, he is describing what we now call metaconsciousness, the ability to observe thoughts and emotions without being dragged by them. This is essential because the conscious observer is the only point in the mind capable of altering automatic patterns. We will explore later how this principle is the key to altering timelines. Jesus, in turn, when he said, "The kingdom is within you," was not offering a motivational metaphor. He was pointing to an inner field of coherence, a vibrational structure that, when activated, changes how a person interacts with the matrix of reality. Modern psychology would call this full self-regulation. Consciousness science would call it neurocardiac coherence. Spiritual traditions would call it alignment. The terminology matters little. The phenomenon is concrete. Inner coherence changes how you perceive threats, opportunities, connections, synchronicities. And this reorganizes your life in remarkable, often rapid ways. What appear to be external changes are, in reality, shifts in your internal permissions. This is what many people, without understanding the mechanics, refer to as a miracle. And a bit later, we will examine how this coherence, sustained, repeated, and cultivated, becomes the point of bifurcation for your personal timeline. When we examine the teachings of Jesus with the proper depth, it becomes clear that many of his statements function as vibrational keys. They are not poetic expressions but structured commands designed to activate specific states of consciousness. A powerful example appears in Luke 17:21, where he says, "The kingdom of God is within you." When this sentence is removed from devotional use and viewed through psychology and modern physics, it reveals something extraordinary. Jesus is directing the individual's attention toward their inner perceptual center, the only place capable of reorganizing reality from within. He does not point to the sky, to temples, or to intermediaries. He points to the inner field. Thoth teaches the same principle through a different vocabulary. In a symbolic passage attributed to him, we find the phrase, "Man is a star bound to a body." This is not historically verifiable, but it represents an ancient teaching about the multidimensional nature of human consciousness. When these two messages, one biblical, one esoteric, are placed side by side, a consistent principle emerges. The external world reflects the internal state. Modern neuroscience confirms part of this mechanism. Studies on self-referential processing, emotional regulation, and neural plasticity show that the brain literally rewires itself based on the thoughts we repeat and the emotional patterns we strengthen. This is not metaphor, it is physiology. Jesus referred to this as renewing the mind, a concept echoed in Romans 12:2, where Paul, drawing from Christ's teachings, writes, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Today, this aligns precisely with what we understand as neural plasticity. Internal change creates new behaviors, perceptions, and choices, and therefore shapes one's experiential timeline. A bit later, we will explore how this renewal becomes vibrational alteration. For now, it is essential to understand that both Thoth and Jesus emphasize the same principle. The world you experience is not merely happening to you, it is emerging from you. Not in the childish magical sense of think positive and everything changes, but in the mature understanding that perception creates filters, and filters create destinies. When Jesus said in Matthew 6:22, "If your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light," he was describing not only morality but perceptual coherence. The quality of the inner gaze determines the quality of the experience. Later, we will deepen this connection and explore how coherence becomes a gateway into parallel realities. When we compare the original Christian teachings, especially the mystical currents within early Christianity, with the Hermetic traditions attributed to Thoth, we discover that these are not opposing systems. Instead, they are two ways of describing the same spiritual anatomy of the human being. This bridge is rarely discussed because institutions historically separated what the masters themselves seemed to unite. Yet when we look past the institutional layers, both traditions reveal consciousness as the central force of creation. In Hermetic philosophy, particularly the principle later summarized as the all is mind, we find the assertion that the universe is mental, vibrational, and dynamic. This does not mean that everything is imagination in a trivial sense, but that the fundamental structure of existence responds to the quality of consciousness perceiving it. Jesus expresses the same idea through different words. In Mark 11:24, he says, "Whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours." Rather than understanding this as magical thinking, we can read it as an instruction on internal coherence. When vibrational state and intention are aligned, behavior, perception, and experience reorganize themselves. Modern science, interestingly, is beginning to approach these same principles, though in different language. Quantum physics suggests that subatomic particles do not exist in a defined state before observation. They exist as probabilities. It is the interaction with the observer that produces the outcome. This does not mean that the mind literally creates physical reality. but that the mind creates experience, and experience shapes the trajectory of one's life. Depth psychology adds an important layer. Most people live inside inherited, unconscious, repetitive internal scripts. Thoth called this the prison of shadows. Jesus referred to it as living in the flesh rather than in the spirit. Both were describing a state in which human beings react mechanically to the world, repeating old patterns. When one awakens, through Christ's inner light or through hermetic wisdom, they stop responding from memory and begin responding from presence. And it is presence that shifts the timeline. A key point emphasized by both Jesus and Thoth, each in their own way, is the power of the word. Not ordinary speech, but the word infused with intention, awareness, and vibrational direction. In Hermetic teachings, we find the principle that vibration shapes form, and that every sound influences the energetic structure of the individual. In the Gospels, Jesus uses highly intentional declarations. Rise, let it be done according to your faith. Your faith has made you whole. These statements were not merely external instructions. They were catalysts for internal shifts. Modern science helps decode this. Neuroscience shows that words activate specific neural networks, modulate neurotransmitters, and directly influence the autonomic nervous system. This means that conscious speech not only communicates an idea, but literally alters the body's chemistry and how the brain interprets reality. This gives new depth to John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word. Even symbolically, this points to the recognition that existence itself arises from a primordial vibration. But there is something even more powerful: repetition with awareness. Across many spiritual traditions, including early contemplative Christianity, the intentional repetition of sacred phrases, prayers, or declarations was considered a mechanism for altering the inner field. This was not superstition, but applied spiritual technology. For this reason, I want to bring in one of the most important instructions of this entire message. The affirmations you record here, in the comments or in your private journal, are more than words. They are vibrational codes. When you write, read, and repeat consciously, you create an energetic circuit that reprograms the mind and anchors this new timeline into your field. So when I invite you to comment, it is not merely for engagement, it is to nourish the collective flow of consciousness. It is an anchoring practice. Daily repetition turns vibration into identity. If you wish to seal this understanding now, write, here or privately, I consciously choose the frequency that creates my world. Repeat it in the coming days, aloud or silently. Let it become the soundtrack of your vibrational field, because each time you pronounce it, the universe reorganizes its particles around your new coherence, and slowly, anything that does not resonate with it dissolves, naturally, effortlessly. This is how theory becomes experience. No blind belief is needed, only presence and consistency. The conscious word is a bridge between who you are now and the timeline you want to inhabit. There is a central point in the spiritual journey that transforms everything once it is truly understood. The mind is not merely an instrument of thought. It is the axis that organizes your experience of reality. Both Jesus and Thoth emphasized this, though in different languages. In mystical Christianity, we find the notion that the Christ is not only a historical figure, but a state of consciousness one can access. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 2:16, "We have the mind of Christ." When examined deeply, this suggests a mode of perception that transcends old conditioning. It is not about imitating behaviors, it is about accessing a heightened level of awareness, more coherent, more lucid, more aligned with the inner field. Thoth teaches something complementary. Human consciousness is a bridge between planes. In symbolic texts attributed to him, the mind is described as the conductor of light, a metaphor for the tool that directs vital energy and decodes multiple frequencies of experience. Modern psychology echoes this. The mind interprets stimuli, creates meaning, and builds internal narratives that shape behavior. This is where spirituality and science converge. The mind shapes perception, and perception shapes destiny. Neuroscience shows that the brain functions through predictive circuits. It does not simply react to the world, it anticipates it and constructs internal reality based on those predictions. This means that when you change your internal structure, beliefs, emotions, expectations, you modify the model your brain uses to interpret events. Jesus called this having eyes to see, Matthew 13:16. Science calls it perceptual modulation. Traditions call it awakening. And this internal shift alters timelines. A timeline, in this context, is not a mystical event floating in space. It is a set of probabilities that reorganizes itself as you reorganize your state of being. When someone changes how they perceive themselves, their past and their possibilities, new paths appear, paths that were previously invisible. This is why Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." John 8:32. Truth here means clear, unconditioned perception. Thoth taught that light dissolves shadows. They were pointing to the same principle. Internal clarity is a portal to new destinies. The mind is the quantum tool of your inner savior. When it aligns, everything aligns. Among ancient traditions, there was a term used to describe those who could perceive multiple layers of reality. The initiated, not because they belonged to secret groups, but because they had crossed an inner threshold. For Jesus, these were those who have ears to hear. For Hermetic teachings, they were the ones awakened to the light behind form. What united them was not a gift, privilege, or spiritual inheritance, but a continuous practice of conscious perception. To be an initiate, at its core, means developing the ability to observe patterns before they become choices. It is living in a depth of presence where synchronicities stop looking like coincidences and start being understood as feedback from the field. It is recognizing that certain coincidences are, in fact, timelines intersecting intentionally, not through magic, but through vibrational coherence. Jesus said in John 10:27, "My sheep hear my voice." Symbolically, this describes sensitivity to intuition, which modern neuroscience interprets as the nervous system's ability to register subtle environmental and bodily signals before the conscious mind does. It is as if the body knows first and the mind follows. Initiates trusted this inner intelligence and learned to follow synchronicities like reading an invisible map. Thoth spoke of walking between worlds. Although metaphorical, this describes the ability to navigate different inner states without losing clarity. Psychologically, it is the ability to move through archetypes, emotions, and subtle perceptions without fully identifying with any of them. Spiritually, it is the understanding that reality is not monolithic, but a set of probabilities responding to your vibrational state. When someone sustains this lucidity, something remarkable happens. They begin to notice doors where they once saw walls. Possibilities that once seemed unlikely become natural. People, opportunities, and pathways that felt distant enter their field in an almost orchestrated manner. It is not that the universe suddenly decides to help. It is that the individual finally starts operating at the same level of organization the universe already holds. This is the essence of the initiate. Someone who no longer lives by impulse but by consciousness. Someone who reads the signs, recognizes patterns, and understands that reality is always speaking. One only needs to learn how to listen. We are living through a unique moment in human history. Never before has there been such simultaneous access to spiritual, scientific, and psychological knowledge. This is not a cultural accident. It is a phenomenon of collective acceleration of consciousness. What was once reserved for a few initiates, encoded in symbolic language or hidden within restricted circles, now reemerges because the modern mind finally has the structure to understand it more objectively. Jesus and Thoth both spoke to audiences that needed metaphors. Today we live in an era capable of decoding them. Modern physics seriously considers the possibility of multiple universes and parallel realities. Neuroscience acknowledges that the brain reconstructs experience based on internal expectations. Psychology recognizes that identity is flexible, fluid, and deeply influenced by vibrational environments. This convergence creates fertile ground for ancient teachings to come alive again, not as dogma, but as consciousness technology. Jesus said, "He who has eyes to see, let him see." Today we have tools that expand our seeing. Research on perception, studies on altered states, investigations into heart coherence, morphic fields, neuroplasticity, and observer-based physics. What once sounded too mystical now finds practical parallels. This is not coincidence, it is a call. Thoth symbolically describes cycles of humanity, ages of light and ages of shadow, where knowledge expanded or contracted depending on the collective field. Regardless of historical literalness, the idea is deeply accurate. Collective consciousness pulses, and now it pulses toward expansion. This is why so many people feel that their lives have accelerated, that synchronicities are increasing, that old patterns are collapsing, that certain people or situations seem to leave the field. It is not chaos, it is reorganization. It is the field responding to internal frequencies that are shifting faster than ever before. When you awaken to this movement of alignment, clarity, presence, and choice, you begin to notice that your timeline becomes more malleable. Not because you control the world, but because you finally stop resisting the flow. The highest timeline already existed. What changes now is your ability to access it. Perhaps the most important truth is this: the knowledge of Jesus and Thoth is returning not to decorate your intellect, but to summon you. Because individual awakening is the missing piece in collective awakening. For all of this not to remain as merely interesting knowledge, it must be translated into routine. Timeline shifting does not happen in a single mystical moment, but through a sequence of small conscious acts repeated until they become your new nature. Jesus said in Matthew 7:16, "By their fruits you will know them." In contemporary language we might say, it is not what you know that changes your reality, but what you consistently embody. Let's translate what Thoth and Jesus pointed to into a concrete practice you can start today. Think of it as a devotional quantum technology, uniting the sacred with the mechanics of the mind. The first step is conscious observation. Every day, set aside a few minutes to notice the state you are actually in. No spiritual masks, no pretending to be high vibe. Just honesty. Ask yourself, what kind of thoughts do I wake up with? What emotions have been recurring? What inner story do I keep repeating? This honesty is deeply spiritual. Jesus called it knowing the truth. Psychology calls it self-awareness. Without it, any attempt to change reality becomes self-deception. The second step is frequency adjustment. You cannot control every thought that appears, but you can choose which ones you feed. Thoth emphasized rising above shadows, which today we might understand as not identifying with reactive mental flow. A simple way to practice this is through the breath. When you notice that you have entered a cycle of fear, guilt, or scarcity, pause for a moment, close your eyes, and do the following. Inhale slowly through the nose, counting to 4. Hold the breath for 4 counts. Exhale gently through the mouth, counting to 4 again. Repeat this cycle a few times until your body begins to relax. As you do this, say inwardly or softly, "I bring my consciousness back to center. I choose clarity. I choose the highest timeline available to me now." This sentence is not magic. It is mental direction. Neuroscience shows that rhythmic breathing and intentional language alter the state of the nervous system, reducing reactivity and increasing clarity. Spiritually, we might say you are stepping out of ego confusion and reconnecting with the axis of the soul. The third step is written reprogramming. Ancient traditions understood the power of what is recorded. Tablets, scrolls, letters, and gospels all point to the same truth. What is written gains special strength in the human field. When you write, it is not only the mind thinking, the body participates, the hand moves, the eyes read, the brain consolidates. Choose a notebook to be your timeline record. Every day, write not only what is happening, but what you consciously choose to live. Not as escapism, but as declaration. For example, I align with the mind of Christ. I choose to perceive with love, clarity, and courage. I walk in the light of wisdom. Everything that does not resonate with my essence naturally leaves my field. I authorize myself to live the reality in which I am whole, conscious, and prosperous. If you want to reinforce this practice, use the comments of this video as a collective altar. When you comment, you are not just interacting with content. You are marking a vibrational position before the universe. You are saying, I choose this. I align with this. For example, you might write, I choose the highest timeline in coherence with my soul. Or, I now close the old scripts and allow truth to reorganize my life. Notice, in John 8:32, when Jesus says, the truth shall make you free, it is not only about theological truth, but the truth about who you are, what you feel, and what you must release. Each time you own that truth and consciously state a new position, something moves in your field. The fourth step is coherence between word and action. There is no point in declaring a higher timeline while clinging to relationships, habits, and environments that contradict what you claim to want. This is the most challenging and most liberating part of the path. As you align internally, certain things will inevitably unravel. Relationships sustained by your insecurity, jobs based on fear, routines that reinforce your disconnection. This is not punishment, it is consequence. You do not need to force anything. But you must be willing not to hold on to what is clearly falling away. Spiritually, this is called trust. Psychologically, it is tolerating the discomfort of growth. In quantum terms, it is letting the collapse of an old probability make space for a new configuration. If you truly want to shift timelines, you must ask the question few dare to ask. What do I need to let go of so that the new reality has room to exist? This question is, in itself, a powerful prayer. It cracks the rigidity of the ego and allows the greater intelligence of life to reorganize your path. It is here that the teachings of Jesus and Thoth cease to be lofty concepts and become daily practice. Breathing, observing, declaring, writing, acting in coherence. This is how you cross from one reality to another, one conscious step at a time. When we gather everything explored so far, the power of the mind, the vibration of the word, the state of coherence, the wisdom of the initiates, the collective awakening, we see that these are not separate ideas. They are expressions of a single principle echoed through history in different languages. Jesus and Thoth were pointing to the same truth. Reality is not limited to what the eyes perceive. It expands as consciousness expands. And when consciousness reorganizes, the timeline reorganizes with it. Understanding this intellectually is only the first step. Real transformation happens when this knowledge becomes daily practice. When you observe your patterns, choose your words carefully, sustain your inner coherence, and consciously choose your frequency. That is when life begins to shift in subtle yet unmistakable ways. Doors open, people arrive, old weights dissolve, and what once felt impossible becomes natural. There is no hidden mystery reserved for the few. There is only willingness to look within, to listen, to choose, and to sustain the choice. Jesus said, "The eye is the lamp of the body." Thoth said that light reveals. Both were speaking of inner clarity, and inner clarity is the vibrational foundation of reality shifting. If you reach this point, you are no longer the same person who began this video. Something has reorganized within you, maybe subtly, maybe deeply, but undeniably. And that shift is the beginning of a new timeline. Before we close, here is the most important vibrational practice for you to carry with you. I consciously choose the frequency that creates my world. Repeat it, write it, anchor it. Let it become part of your energetic signature. Let it open pathways you have yet to imagine. And now, the final words. closing this cycle while opening another within you. If this message resonated with you, share it. Help expand this field of consciousness, because every awakened person illuminates hundreds of others. Leave your comment, your vibration, your testimony, not for engagement alone, but because your energy is part of this collective creation. And remember, the highest timeline is not a place in the future. It is a state of being, available here and now. May you walk in peace, clarity, and love. Until the next awakening.